at this for a second here. You guys did a little psychological analysis when it came to crime and punishment. Okay, so we know about the doubles and how that's working and everything like that. So let's look just a little bit on this kind of background analysis. I do want to focus on the third part, right, with the Kurtz meeting, but let's just see how we can track it, okay, from the beginning of the novel on. Our psychological anchors is going to be London and Belgium, okay? And I have a quote here that I want you guys to look at and tell me, like, why do you think these are psychological anchors, all right? It says, you can't understand, how could you, with solid pavement under your feet, surrounded by kind neighbors ready to cheer you or fall on you, stepping delicately between the butcher and the policeman, in the holy terror of scandal and gallows and lunatic asylums, how can you imagine what particular region of the first ages a man's untrammeled feet may take him into by the way of solitude, utter solitude without a policeman? Okay, so what are you just kind of noticing in terms, this is Marlowe talking to the guys on the Nelly. It's one of the breaks, okay? And so what are you kind of noticing in terms of civilization here that he seems to think anchors us? Yeah.
Maybe like the law, because it mentions policemen first.
Law and order, right? We have the policemen, the here, okay, in the holy terror of scandal and gallows and lunatic asylums, right? So we have that sense of law and order, okay? So civilization can be an anchor for us, right, as individuals. It provides us with a set of rules that we follow, okay? It provides us with a sense of morality. In terms of these anchors, does this sound a little bit like Raskolnikov? Yeah, right? It sounds a little bit like Raskolnikov, okay? So it's that infrastructure, right? There's infrastructure built into civilization that basically allows this sense of, I know what to do because I know how law works, okay? Like I know the rules, okay? So that's what anchors him. Well, once we get into the Congo, those anchors are removed, okay? And so now we're allowed to, or now Marlowe is allowed to explore, right, psychologically a little bit more. So the stations, okay, are psychological stops before diving deeper into the subconscious. So we have the outer station, the central station, and then the inner station is where we get really into the subconscious. But we have those stops, we have people that he meets and he talks to, we have some rules, not a lot, right? It's a little absurd, right? But there is some kind of order going on, okay? And then we leave the central station and we go into the inner station, we're moving into the subconscious. Okay, the journey, right, is the journey into the subconscious. And the wilderness is, remember all those wilderness quotes that we looked at? The depths of the mind that we cannot enter, the immensity, right, the silence, this idea that it could overtake you, right? We saw all of those quotes about Africa, the actual place, and we have that kind of sense that it's the part that we don't understand or we can't really enter into. Beyond the fence, the forest stood up spectrally in the moonlight, and through the dim stir, through the faint sounds of that lamentable courtyard, the silence of the land went home to one's very heart. Its mystery, its greatness, the amazing reality of its concealed life, the secrets within us, right, that we don't even quite understand or can barely tap into. And then the inner stations when he gets into the inner recesses of the mind. Okay, yeah.
So like, is this why Kurtz wants to stay in the wilderness and like that's his choice? It seems like because he, like the immensity has like overtaken him.
Yeah. Okay. Immensity of subconscious has overtaken him, right? and this is a little like, id, ego, and superego, okay, in this sense, right? If Kurtz gets to stay in the wilderness, he gets to basically let his id run free. He doesn't have the ego, he doesn't have to worry about like moral consciousness, he doesn't have to worry about societal consciousness, the superego. So the id is able to just kind of like be out and explore and like just be that innate primal self. Okay, is kind of the feeling here when it comes to Kurtz, yeah.
Is he aware of his actions in the sense that like he doesn't want to go back to society because of the fact that he'll have consequences there? Or is it just that he's gotten so used to not having any?
I think it's a little bit of both, right? I think it's a little bit of both. I think, one, he's enjoying himself, okay? He's seemingly having a great time there, so we kind of know that. And then he knows that if he goes back, he's going to have to abide by the rules of civilization that he has completely ignored for however time that he's been there, okay, in the heart, right, of the Congo. Okay, so we can think about it in that sense, all right? So we think at this point, because we're about to look at a quote, at this point, Kurtz is full in subconscious mode. Okay, he is letting his subconscious drive his actions without any sort of moral framework. Okay, and he seems to be liking this freedom, as we know, right? The way that he's being treated is that he's an idol, everybody loves him, okay? So he's living well. He does not want to be thrust back into a psychological anchor. Okay? So now, how does Marlowe play into this is the main thing, okay? So when you're a double, remember, you are, basically it's that person, like embodied, like a facet of that person coming out and embodied, okay? And in part 3, we see that Marlowe confronts Kurtz and they have this like psychological struggle. And that's what we're going to be looking at. What's this psychological struggle? What are we noticing here? How does it end? Okay, so let's look at this first quote, okay? This is when he follows Kurtz out into the wilderness. Kurtz is trying to run away, and Marlowe is basically like, hey, you're caught. He rose unsteady, long, pale, indistinct, like a vapor exhaled by the earth, and swayed slightly, misty and silent before me. While at my back, the fires loomed between the trees. A black figure stood up, strode on long black legs, waving long black arms across the glow. It had horns, antelope horns, I think, on its head. I had to beat that shadow, this wandering and tormented thing. You will be lost, I said, utterly lost. Take a couple of minutes, work with someone next to you, okay? And just think, what are you noticing in terms of what Marlowe is trying to say? What's the like backdrop, the scene kind of going on? How can we put a little psychological spin on this? Okay, so take a couple minutes, talk to someone next to you, annotate and underline, and then I'll ask you guys what you came up with.
Yeah, I think that's what he wants to implement. Like he has to be the first step by the situation.
Oh no, everyone around him was like also looking up his eye.
Is a thing, yeah, right, like human and.
It's like almost like these has horns
So you don't even like
It's like just devil.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like some devil imagery going on. Right, like what happens when you take out all infrastructure? It's like the devil type of stuff. But yeah.
Same with the shadows, like an extension of like.
Kurtz is like becoming a shadow. Right, like Kurtz is losing all of the humanness. Basically, like he's a vapor. It says. Yeah, like he's like this ghost of like a human. He's a thing now because he's so like far gone. I guess we would say morally, right? Like socially and morally, that type of thing. And so that's kind of like we could apply the end, like you will be lost, like what that means. And with that too. Good.
This reminds me of, what was his name in Miss Scarlet Letter?
Oh,
The one-
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. Killingsworth's greed makes him like a thing, an animal. Yeah.
I would understand why he said that he will be lost. Like he's already like far gone.
Yeah. I think he was saying that if you go back to the natives instead of civilization, you'll be lost forever.
I think you're right when he's like lost in the psychological sense, but I think in his place in society, he's not. If he goes back, like you said, he's so
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a lot about it. But I guess like a normal like satanic description. Yeah. Okay.
But the natives are like underwater.
Yeah.
He's something to the pity.
Yeah. But they still got things.
All right,
So like,
I'm hearing a lot of good things. Whoever wants to start me off, tell me what you kind of like underlined, annotated, noticed when it comes to what's going on here with Kurtz and Marlowe. Yeah, go for it again.
So there's like a lot of like imagery about like his description. Like he doesn't appear to be human. He appears to be something like wild, something very primitive. So wildlife is also like an example of dehumanization. It's also like showing how Prince is just really far gone. And then it's also like the you will. I think there was something else that stuck out to us was the you will be lost part. And that's kind of like a little bit of a mirror, like seeing how Prince is just like I guess so far gone. And then the comparisons to nature just show that he's lost like all touch with society. He's like completely disconnected from the id and the superego and the ego, and he's like totally giving it to the id. And something else that was mentioned was that while the id in like Crime and Punishment was something that was more like Roscoe was like, oh, I want to follow the id, I want to follow my passions. This passage is showing the consequences of that, and it's a little bit less of the perspective from the perspective of the person who is choosing to follow the id, but like the effect that that has on the surrounding area.
Really quickly, when you're saying Kurtz is not humid, wild or primitive, Kurtz is far gone, what in the quote specifically is giving us that?
So it was also like this slightly like he's like kind of off balance,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole like unsteady, and then he's also like indistinct, like a vapor exhaled by the earth. Like that to me gives like something inhuman, like something like almost fantastical.
Yeah.
And then also the black figure standing up, and then the fact that the black figure is described as an it, and not like as a they, he or she or something like that.
Mhm.
It's not classified as a person at this point.
Good, okay. So definitely we're getting this sense of this shadow, this not being human, a vapor, he's unsteady, imbalanced. In order to be like psychologically well, your id, ego, and superego has to be in balance. So we have that kind of like unsteadiness. And then of course the you will be lost. I said utterly lost. Kurtz is so far gone. Marlowe notices that. It's almost like, but we may think of doubles that you not only refers to Kurtz, but Marlowe. If you give in, okay, and it is more like a warning, right? Like if you give in, you are going to be lost like him. Okay, if you give in to those primal instincts, right? If you let go of society, you're going to be like this guy. Okay, so we kind of see Marlowe not only talking to Kurtz, but talking to himself as well. Okay, yeah, Asha.
We also were talking about how the tone is like very fearful. I think Marlowe is like really fearful of what says like this wandering and tormented thing, slightly misty and silent, because I think at the beginning, like Marlo felt like some sort of connection to Kurtz because they were kind of grouped in this category together by
Yeah.
the company, and everyone like idolized him in the same way that like everyone was kind of excited for what Marlo could do.
Yeah.
But now I think he's realizing like the detriment, like and the weight of what they're doing
Yeah.
and like what can happen. And then we also were talking about how describing Kurtz as like, or using like antelope horns and like kind of describing him as like wild and animalistic, and is like the same thing as earlier when the author was like using Africa as like this place, an entity that like has the capability to bring out like the worst qualities in people. And like again, saying like what Danica was saying was that it's like allowing him to follow his aid.
Yeah. And Ashna brought up a good point, right? Marlo felt a connection. Like Marlo could have been Kurtz. They both work for the company. They're both, have like okay intentions in the beginning. Like Marlo also doesn't want to plunder and kill people in the beginning, right? Nor does he ever, seemingly. And then we also, and so there is like that connection there. So Marlo could turn like Kurtz is kind of the idea. Like if he wanted to, he could. Anybody could. That's part of that company, right? So what's keeping Marlo from going that way? Yeah.
I think the reason that he is being kept from going that way is, I think that the part where it says, I had to beat the shadow,
Yeah.
he recognizes that if he doesn't move fast enough, it will take over. And Diana brought up a good point about how like the horns and the devil imagery, it could represent like God versus Satan almost, and how he almost associates all the wildness with like the devil. And if he doesn't continue to recognize it and move fast, then it will take him over just like it did for
Yeah, kind of like the darkness, right? Like entering into the darkness that's, light usually associated with God, and then darkness usually associated with the devil, right? And so we have this scene, I think you're saying, right, that is fearful and ominous. There's a devil figure in the shadows, okay? Kurtz is like going towards that devil figure and using the devil figure to protect him, essentially. And Marlo is basically like, I have to beat it. I have to get away from this, okay? Or I'm going to be lost. And lost, it seems to be like morally lost. Okay? Like Kurtz, as we kind of find out, has been morally lost. Okay, let's look at a kind of continuation of this, right? When he continues to confront Kurtz. He says, I tried to break the spell, the heavy, mute spell of the wilderness that seemed to draw him to its pitiless breast by awakening of forgotten and brutal instincts, by the memory of gratified and monstrous passions. This alone, I was convinced, had driven him out to the edge of the forest, to the bush, towards the gleam of fires, the throb of drums, the drone of weird incantations. This alone had beguiled his unlawful soul beyond the bounds of permitted aspirations. There was nothing either above or below him, and I knew it. He had kicked himself loose of the earth. I before him did not know whether I stood on the ground or floated in the air. Okay? Again, take a couple minutes, right? Same deal. Look and see how we're forwarding some of these kind of psychological theory notions. Okay.
I feel like there's a lot of, I don't think magic is the right word, but like kind of supernatural, where he's talking about like a spell and incantation, and kind of like this, I don't know what the word is, but like, it's like this
like he was like bravo with her own and the stuff like that, like kind of the way that like said it, like your heart is throbbing.
I don't know why.
You know? The way, I guess like
So you're saying like the spell
his diction,
and like what's drawing
like the words that Marla was using to
drawing
describe
Kurt
like
is like the native.
actually matters. I think it's just making it seem like
Strong song.
exactly, it's very descriptive and it like it makes it like like it really shows like the image for like how like Kurt was like really wanted because he didn't like go intending to go
Yes.
like
So
so or
you think, don't you like after something as simple for the
So they
depth
said
of the
that it
subconscious?
seemed to
Like the
draw him
scary.
by awakening
it's like that
Yeah.
but it's like
forgotten
strong.
and
It's like
brutal
when he
instincts.
was
Is
like
that
in a
like
place
saying
where
that
fools could not fly,
like,
he was
Yes.
just drawn into
Yes.
natives and the like Africa as a whole is like the reason why Kurt gets his obsession with
Yeah,
Dark
I think so.
parts of our subconscious.
And then he also like does this whole thing like,
yeah.
Right, is kind of the idea here. And it's like
demon
just
fire, like drop the spell.
like taking it out. It's that sort of type of stuff that we can kind of like.
Like I feel like, I mean, I think he's just talking about like cultural stuff, like the natives and like talking about them in a negative way. Yeah.
Exactly, because if you think about it, right,
So I think he's thinking like,
think about like how he like himself.
This is
And
why
remember when he
he has
was
like
like the manager and all that stuff, it's like that
and get
absurdity.
lost in it.
There is seemingly no
I
rules.
leave him.
They're supposed to make the rules. They're supposed to be doing the work that they're supposed to be doing and nobody's doing anything.
Would he
Right,
also
and so
lost
when
him
they're,
like
they look
for
like,
him to not know what was going
and
on?
so it's really, it seems some sort of like civilized structure
Kurt
is
is like
what
his measuring.
I think so, yeah. Like we were talking about before how Kurt's or Marlo could have become Kurt.
in that
I think even Marlo's still unaware if he can, stay grounded and kind of suppress the id, or kind of float in the air and kind of let loose, just like,
he's starting to go, right? He's starting to like be beguiled too here, is kind of the idea. He's like starting to like fall in. He doesn't know where he's at. Okay, so it's like that temptation is like, in this quote, the temptation is kind of leading him in that.
But why did he say like, I thought he meant that like, when he compares himself to Kurt, he realizes that he's like not that far.
Well, he's not as far gone as Kurt, right? He's not, but he's like he's starting to kind of like kind of just like, I don't know, he's getting tempted a little bit is kind of that idea. So he's like feeling like he doesn't have foundation, right? Foundation right now. And so he needs to like, basically he needs to snap them out of it, which he eventually does. Yeah.
So when he's saying he's not connected to the earth anymore,
Yeah.
is it saying that he's no longer part of any society or any?
Doesn't feel, yeah. He doesn't feel, right? Like he, at that moment, he feels like weightless, like he doesn't have like something to stand on, some foundation. And that foundation could be infrastructure, morality, right? He's feeling kind of like, I could do anything, just like this guy. Kind of that feeling, yeah.
I think that's part of why he's like,
Yeah.
But like he talks so negatively like about his behavior and like the first
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all him trying to, it's him, I mean, he understands that it's not good, right? He knows Kurtz is a bad guy. He's trying not to fall into that, because the opportunity is there for him to fall into that. And like we know with like the id, we know the id can do bad things, but it's also tempting to let your id. And that's part of it, is that it's tempting to just let your primal instincts take over everything, right? And just basically not be like human anymore. And that's what he is, he's tempted.
Yeah, I guess like when you come into your age, you like don't care about
Yeah.
it's morally wrong.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you start losing those foundations, you start floating, right? You start losing that, okay? Good.
is that like what, is that like the spell that he's trying to break, is the temptation?
Okay, I think we can talk about this a little bit.
I thought he said like he had the spell on Kurt.
Yeah.
I think he's like referring to himself.
Okay,
Yeah, but like.
lots of good conversations happening here. Tell, just whoever wants to start, what are you noticing? Yeah.
It's more that idea of Marlo like completely realizing just exactly how far Chris has gone. Like to be their like primal selves, and that's what Kurtz wants. Kurtz is like he really wants that. He's learned in by the wilderness
Yes.
where morals and rules do not apply.
Right, so the wilderness is that subconscious notion of the primal that oftentimes we're too scared to access. So, but now it's open and they're in it. And not only Kurtz is in it, right, and wants to stay in it, but Marlowe is in it. He's in the wilderness too, okay, is kind of that sense. So, and what I noticed here, right, is that, you know, he knows he needs to break the spell. I tried, okay, not I broke yet, right, I tried, okay, so he's still attempting, but he's still in it, okay, here too. So he does have this opportunity in this quo. He could leave the wilderness or he can stay with Kurtz. All right, what else did you have in mind? Yeah.
We kind of talked about, I was wondering like why Marlowe is taking this so personally, but we were talking about how like that connection, he's seeing somebody like him
Yeah.
end up like the other people of the Congo. And I think to him that's kind of like he's giving up, he sees himself in
Yes.
Kurtz almost.
Yes.
And like because of that he's trying to decide whether to save himself
Yes.
or save Kurtz and lose himself in the process. And I don't know if he has like the mental strength to do
Yes.
so, to like disassociate himself from what he's doing.
Yes. He needs the mental. I guess he needs the mental strength. It's kind of like the double thing, right? He needs the mental strength to separate himself from his evil double, Kurtz, right? And he's struggling here. It's a little bit like Raskolnikov spit. Okay, yeah.
And it kind of adding on, like towards the end of the paragraph, it talks about like there was nothing either above or below him, and I think that kind of shows how Marlowe like fully acknowledges that Kurtz is kind of, you know, floating away from Earth, from civilization, but he himself doesn't know if he's gonna fall into the temptation or if he's, you know, gonna use his morals to ground him, which is what like he says, like he doesn't know if I stood on the ground or floated in the air. And I think it's kind of talking about, I think what Ria said about that connection he has with Kurtz, and kind of that internal battle of whether he's gonna, you know, stay with his morals or forgo them.
It's an internal psychological battle. Okay, is kind of what he says. I, before him, did not know whether I stood on the ground or floated in the air. Kurtz has kicked loose of the earth. He has kicked loose of foundation, okay, the foundation of civilization, the anchor, remember? Civilization is our anchor. Well, Kurtz has cut off that anchor, okay? And so he can do whatever he wants now, because he's cut off the anchor of civilization. He's full primal. Now, Marlowe is starting to feel a little anchorless too. Okay, so he's getting tempted, right? He's being beguiled. That word here. Where is it? Beguiled. Okay? He's feeling beguiled as well. Yeah, Danica.
Oh, so going off of Arden's quote, there was nothing either above nor below. We took that a little differently to look at like heaven and hell. So like there's really nothing like
Yes.
that's controlling his actions. He's like not bound by any sort of morals or any sort of like societal construct. And then kind of going a little bit above that with the throb of the drums and the drugs or incantations, like Marlowe is starting, even though Marlowe, I guess it's like showing the disconnect, like from at the end of the passage where Marlowe's like, I'm not sure where I stand, versus like slightly up where he's talking about the drawing of weird incantations, like there, at that point he's like, oh, what Kurtz has like fallen to is weird, how could I ever go there? By the end of the passage you see him starting to like consider it a little bit more. So Marlowe is like also maybe going down that road.
Yeah, and you can do heaven and hell imagery, totally. There's the fires, there's the drum beats, right? The incantations. That sounds very hellish. Okay, so we have that. The heaven and hell also connects to the double imagery in the previous quote. Okay, if heaven is heaven, religion, right? Christianity, if you will, is that sense of moral consequences, okay? Like your moral sense of how you're supposed to act within society. Hell is like the consequences of that, like you'll go to hell if you don't act this way, type of thing. Kurtz kind of doesn't need either. Okay, Kurtz doesn't need the morality, nor does he need the consequences because he doesn't care anymore. Okay, is kind of that feeling that we have here when it comes to that. Okay, so that's kind of what we're seeing here with this, right? Is that we have Marlowe being tempted in the wilderness. Okay, Marlowe is tempted in the wilderness. The wilderness is the subconscious. Wilderness equals subconscious. And so he's being tempted to kind of stay in there and let his primal self loose. He is like Kurtz. Okay? Anyone in the company could have been like Kurtz. And so he is basically, he could stay there with Kurtz. He could stay with Kurtz. He could not, he doesn't have to go back. And they can do whatever they want there. Okay, and no one can get them. Now, we know that he does snap out of it, okay, because we've read the ending. Okay, he goes back to Belgium. And so we know he snaps out of it, and he does take Kurtz out of the wilderness. Okay, with this. I want to do, before we do kind of the last thing, I want to do a quick like stop and jot for everybody, just to kind of help you guys sum up a little bit, and have you guys put it all together, okay? So I want you to be thinking in this, like, and you don't have to fill up this page. I'm just going to give you a blank piece of paper, fill up what you need. I just want you to think, why does Marlowe take this psychological journey? What is he looking for? Okay, and it could be just like reviewing and putting together some of the ideas that we've been talking about. What does Kurtz mean to him? And what theme emerges if he is to follow Kurtz? Okay, so whatever, pen or pencil, just write notes. Okay, just kind of start writing and see if you can come up with some ideas here, just to kind of wrap it up for yourself. Paper. I always like the psychological stuff, don't you? The true adventure, psychological journeys. Just write your name. It doesn't need to be like fully formed or anything like that. Just notes, notes, notes. What did you get out of this? And essentially what you need to think of. pause, just because I've been kind of looking over your shoulders and reading a little bit of what you're saying, and a lot of similarities are coming up. I've seen a lot of the word like curious, okay? A general curiosity in terms of this journey, right? But we know that on a post-colonial scale, Marlowe is curious about adventure, the Congo, right? On a psychological scale, right? The psychological idea, he is curious about the journey through the subconscious and what is he going to find. So what is this darkness in all of us? Okay? And what happens when we find it? Is kind of the idea that some of you I have been seeing. Okay? What is this darkness and how can we find it? Right? So he journeys through the subconscious. He finds Kurtz at the center. It doesn't seem good, right? It doesn't seem good here when we see that. It seems that he is actually, you turn devilish. It's very ominous, dark. He's tempted to just like let go, but it's not like let go in a good way, it seems. So what do you think Conrad is advocating for? What do humans need, according to Conrad? Yeah.
We need some sort of law and order, some sort of structure to prevent us from reaching this deep, dark side of ourselves.
Yes.
That leads to chaos.
Yes, right? There's a darkness all within us that we can have the journey to take, like we can let go of. Obviously, it doesn't end good because Kurtz is not a positive character. He is advocating for anchors. Okay? We need law and order. We need civilization. Okay? Is kind of the idea here, right? Because it's not a happiness surrounding this, it's that we need to be able to return back to our anchors when it comes to this too, right? So just some of the thoughts that I was seeing here when it comes to that. The bell's gonna ring soon, right?